this through Jesus. Amen. It's the 10th of the lessons, but chapter 9. I keep forgetting that the chapters and the lesson numbers are not the same. So we've only got three more, counting this one, three more lessons, three more chapters. And so we will be getting there very, very soon. I want to start with, as always, with just a little bit of review, and in particular, looking at Noah and Noah's section in this. So continuing to look at him in chapter 9 as well. He's introduced to us at the end of chapter 5. And we discovered in chapter 6 that Noah was faithful to God despite how bad everyone else was. He and his family were different from everybody else, and God was going to spare them the destruction that was about to come on the earth. God told him to build a large boat so that he and his family, as well as representative animals, would be spared. And Noah did exactly what God told him to do. It took about 100 years, from what we can tell in the text, to build this large boat. Into the ark went representatives of all the animals, and of course the supplies they would need to live on that ark for about a year, and possibly some for just after, before they were able to grow any crops. But they got on board, and then the rain started. And it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. The waters rose, the ark floated above the flood, but all the life on the earth was killed. The waters kept rising. The tops of the mountains were covered to a depth of around 20 feet, and the waters prevailed for 150 days. We get to chapter 7, the waters began going down and receded for another 150 days. The ark grounded on the mountains of Ararat. And after the tops of the mountains could be seen, I think we're back into chapter 8 by this point, Noah sent out birds to see if the earth was dry. At last the dove did not return, so Noah knew that the land was drying out, so that life could resume on the ground again. And at the right time, God told Noah to leave the ark with all the animals. And Noah, as patriarch, first thing he does after he gets off the boat, he offers burnt offerings to God, burnt offerings of the clean animals and birds that he and his family thanked God for their deliverance. God promised to never again curse the ground because of how evil the people were. And that's where we left it at the end of chapter 8. So that leads us into chapter 9, where we're going to see God continuing to talk with Noah, and also have details of the covenant, the promise that God made to the earth, and the sign that he gave, as well as more information on Noah and his family in the years following the flood. So an outline for this chapter that I'm sort of using this evening. I'm going to look at God's instructions to Noah in the first 7 verses. Verses 8 to 17, his covenant with the earth. And then 18 down to 29 talks about Noah and his sons, and then Noah's death. So let's get into the text. If you have your own Bibles open, you can follow along. This is from McCord's translation. God blessed Noah and his sons and said, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, upon all the birds of the sky, upon everything that creeps on the earth, and upon all the fish of the sea. Into your hand I have given them. As I have given you every green plant, so every living, moving creature is yours for food. However, flesh with its life, its blood, you shall not eat. For your life's blood I will surely require an accounting. Of every beast and from every human being I will require an accounting for the life of his neighbor. Whoever kills a human being shall be killed. For God made human beings in his image. And you You be fruitful and multiply, bring forth great numbers in the land. Bill Grasham comments, uh, we enter this chapter, he wrote, upon leaving the ark, Noah was sent forth as the second Adam. I think we introduced that idea in our last lesson. The world had been marred and destroyed by sin, but Noah's family still bore the image of God. God was instituting a new beginning for all living creatures through Noah and the others preserved on the ark. So this chapter is about God establishing a new covenant with Noah and his descendants. In fact, the word covenant is found in this chapter about 7 times. So that's one of the major themes of this particular chapter. We learn some things about God and our relationship to him in these covenants. And he had a sort of a covenant, not use that word on it, earlier with Adam. Of course, there's going to be the Mosaic covenant. There's going to be the new covenant under Jesus. But they all tell us something about God. It tells us that God cares for people. He bothers to make a covenant because he loves us. God is the one who initiates covenants with people. God always takes the initiative. We don't do that. God does. God seeks fellowship with people, with humans in covenants. The covenant is to bring God and people together. God creates communities with covenants. God saves and blesses individuals as part of a community of followers. So these covenants have some distinct ideas involved in them. Now, as we read through the text, I don't know if you noticed the first part there. It talks about there's going to be a different relationship between people and animals. Uh, Apparently, they were everybody's on friendly terms before the flood, but God now said that animals would fear humans. The exception being the livestock or the cattle, representing domesticated animals. They're not included in the list. Also, a change. Before the flood, humans seemed to have been vegetarian. You see that's going to change in verse 3. Although it's difficult to know for certain because we don't have that information specifically given. But God now explicitly stated that they were permitted to eat any meat as long as the blood has been drained. Why this change? Henry Morris, in his commentary, suggested that possibly the New World's more rigorous environment required animal protein found in meat that was not required prior to the flood. From my knowledge of nutrition, there are a few vitamins that can only be found in animal protein. Uh, there are vegan substitutes, but they're not quite as effective. And I also recently learned that once you get into your 60s, where I now am, protein is even more needed. So that was interesting. So we have this new covenant being established. Jewish commentators list the following differences between this one with Noah and what he had earlier told Adam. You may have noticed that this one forbids murder. We'll talk about that in a minute. Adam wasn't given that. Of course, if you think about it, when Adam was told how that they were to live, it was just Adam and Eve. So murder wasn't really something that he had to worry about. Now we realize it's something that has been done, and there needs to be a law against it. We also have a forbidding of idolatry. And again, not given to Adam. Don't think that was needed. They only worshiped God. They knew God in a very intimate way. A forbidding of theft. And again, that's not something that would necessarily have to be required for Adam. We have a forbidding of incest, forbidding eating of blood, forbidding blasphemy, and sort of the establishment of a court of justice. We'll look more about that in just a minute. There are also other similarities and differences. Both Adam and Noah were told to be fruitful and multiply. In verse 7 of Genesis 9, the you is a plural word in Hebrew. You all be fruitful and multiply. If you remember back in Genesis chapter 1, Adam was told to subdue animals. Noah was told that they would fear him. If they didn't fear people before this time, it would have been a whole lot easier to get the animals into the ark and deal with them in captivity for the year that they were there in the ark. Adam was told to eat of the trees. Noah was told that he could eat meat. But Noah was told not to eat the blood. Of course, later on, that's in the Mosaic covenant as well. And the reason is that it's life, that is, it's blood. The life is in the blood. Bill Grasham writes, since God is the only one who can give life, the people who remained after the flood were obliged to respect the life force that the Lord had placed in all creatures. In this context, blood is equated with life itself. For this reason, eating and drinking it was forbidden. And if you think about the Mosaic law that's going to come many years after this, blood was part of the sacrifice that was God's. It was dashed against the altar. By the way, there's no parallel, from what I understand, in any other culture that has that sort of thing about forbidding eating blood and the blood being that which belongs to God of the sacrifice. This indicates this definitely was a God-given command. By the way, we know today that blood carries diseases as well. Of course, there's also a law against murder, shedding blood, indicating premeditated murder. Murder can only be done to another human being. The penalty for murder was the life of the murderer. And the reasons given for not killing each other, verse 7, God made people in his own image. Because humans are made in God's image, life is sacred. Thus, we have a law against murder. By the way, there is a difference between killing animals and killing people. But even if an animal were to kill a human being, there is a price to be paid. That's the animal's life. We see this also in the Mosaic covenant. It's in Exodus 21, verse 28. And it's even practiced today. If you have a dog that kills somebody or mauls somebody, that dog is put down. Notice with the forbidding of murder is the introduction, basically, of a judicial system. God's not authorizing vengeance killing, but that society will have the authority to give capital punishment for murder. And this we know continued under the Mosaic covenant, and it's even found as part of the new covenant in Romans 13, given to governments. Human life is a gift from God and God alone. Man is not free to take it. Bill Grasham again writes, the deeper reason for outlawing murder is that human life differs qualitatively from all other forms of life on earth. The Lord prescribed that a person must forfeit his own life if he is guilty of murder, because human beings are the only creatures who bear the sacred image of God on this earth. When people lose sight of the image of God in man, humans are treated like animals, and life becomes cheap. This attitude, in turn, leads to every kind of atrocity and mass murder, for it removes any basis for respecting human personality or the God who gave man his dignity. So there's a reason why that is included now in this covenant that God makes with Noah. William Smith comments that these verses show three new commands that were given to Noah. We've got the idea, don't eat blood. We've got don't murder. And then also the recognition of civil authority. Whoever kills a human being shall be killed. Uh, this particular dialogue here, the first 7 verses, ends with God repeating his command for humans to multiply in the earth, to bring forth numbers in the land. Hebrew text literally means they were to bring forth in swarms. So there's only 8 people to start with. There needs to be some more people. Again, Bill Grasham wrote, the initial responsibility of procreation remained. The world needed to be populated once again. By the way, I would suggest that humans have done this pretty well, haven't they? From the 8 people after the flood, the population has increased in about 4,500 years to 8.282 billion, which is the current population is estimated for the world today. That's an average, by the way, of about, over history, 2.5 children per family who survive and have children. Somebody worked all that out. It had taken me a long time to figure out all the equations to use. Verse 8, then God said to Noah and to his sons, I, even I, am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants, with all the living creatures which were with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals who came out of the ship, every creature of the earth. I establish my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall a flood destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I'm making between me and you and every living creature with you for unending generations. I have placed my rainbow in the clouds for a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, then in the clouds the rainbow shall be seen. And I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, that never again shall the waters be a flood to destroy all flesh. When I see the rainbow in the clouds, I will remember the unending covenant between God and every living creature among all flesh upon the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all the flesh of the earth. So God establishes this covenant with Noah, with people. A covenant, by the way, more than just a promise, it's an agreement. This is the first use of the word covenant in the Bible. The Hebrew word is Berith, bereth, I assume, something like that. And this covenant had 3 major features, which hopefully you picked up on as I read that, because they keep being repeated. It's unconditional. It's God doesn't ask any pledge of obedience. This is a one-sided covenant. This is what God's going to do. We also see that it is eternal. It is unending, and it is universal. Notice it applies to all living creatures. And I think that was said at least 3 times, maybe 4 times in this short text. God promised to never again destroy the earth with water. Now, notice what it does not say. It doesn't say there's never going to be a flood. It says there's never going to be another worldwide flood to wipe out all people. So it's not promising no more floods, but it is promising no more worldwide floods to bring an end to everything that lives on the earth. And he put the rainbow in the sky as a sign, as a token of his covenant with Noah, really with mankind, and really with the animals as well, to never destroy the whole earth again by water. So a covenant with everything that lives on the earth. Notice, though, what the text says about this. It says that God said the rainbow was a reminder to him of his covenant, not to us, but to him. And by the way, not that he was in danger of forgetting it, but as a reassurance to people that God would keep his covenants. So when we see a rainbow in the sky, as I took this picture a year or so back in our area, we can look up there and remember God's covenant. That's a good thing to teach your children and your grandchildren, by the way. When they see a rainbow, that's a reminder of God's covenant that never again will destroy everything by water. We're blessed in this country to live in a place where you get lots of rainbows. I guess if you have lots of sunshine, lots of rain, rather, you get lots of rainbows. And so we're blessed that we get to see quite a few. By the way, we don't know if this was the very first rainbow. If there had been no rain previous to the flood, it very well could have been the first one. Or if he took the rainbow and gave it a new spiritual significance because of its association with rain. Verses 18 down to the end of the chapter. The sons of Noah had gone out of the ship, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham became the father of Canaan. These three are the sons of Noah, and from them all earth was populated. Noah became a farmer and he planted a vineyard. After he drank from the wine, he became drunk and uncovered himself in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and went outside and told his brothers. Then Shem and Japheth put a garment on both their shoulders, walked backward, and covered their father's nakedness. They turned their faces away and did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah had aroused from his wine, he became aware of what his youngest son had done and said, "Cursed is Canaan, a slave of slaves he shall be to his brother." Also he said, "Blessed is Yahweh, God of Shem, and let Canaan be his slave. Let God enlarge Japheth, let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his slave." Noah lived after the flood 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. A lot of interesting things here. I'm not sure we have an answer to all that's going on there either. Attention's now directed to Noah and his sons and what happens to them after the flood. This is a painting I found on Wikipedia by Ivan Ivzovsky from the late 1800s called The Descent of Noah from Ararat. So I'm not sure where they descended to, but anyway, I liked the painting and thought I'd use it. But we're reminded, once again, that Noah has three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham has a son named Canaan. Now, he's the only one mentioned in this chapter as a descendant. We'll get other descendants later on. But why is he mentioned here? Well, he's going to figure in this particular narrative. From them, all descendants of the earth can be traced. We'll see that more in our next chapter. Tradition has it, I'm assuming it's a Jewish tradition, that Noah and his family lived on the lower slopes of Mount Ararat, apparently on the northern side. I don't know where that came from. But Noah is said to be a farmer, not the first to be a tiller of the soil. The Revised Standard Version actually had that. But he's a tiller of the soil. He's a farmer who planted a vineyard. Adam was also a farmer. Cain was a farmer. There are other farmers before him, but Noah is one who also has a vineyard. He plants this vineyard, he makes wine, and he becomes drunk. Peter Williams pointed out in the Day One commentary that it's sad for such a great man of God to be recorded as the first to become drunk. Although it's most likely that he's not the first ever to become drunk. I have a feeling that the problems of sin that Cain's line brought as the earth descended into wickedness at the beginning of chapter 6, that would have been part of it as well. We'll see a quote about that in just a minute. William Smith, in fact, it's the quotes right here. William Smith says intoxication was doubtless practiced by the profligate race, talking about the descendants of Cain, who ate and drank before the flood. But it would seem to have been a new thing with Noah. No matter what your view on consuming alcohol is, the Bible condemns in the strongest terms being drunk, consistently in the Old and the New Testaments. If Noah were the world's first husbandman, he would have been unaware of the effects of fermented grape juice, the wine. Henry Morris takes the view that that's been around for a while and no one knew exactly what he was doing. And very well he could have. Bill Grasham writes, even though he was a righteous man who walked with God, we must be careful not to think of him as though he were above sin. The text clearly says that he drank of the wine and became drunk. While drunk, he uncovered himself. Ham saw it, told his brothers, and then the other two brothers covered Noah without looking. Because Ham saw his father's nakedness, his son Canaan was cursed. By the way, the Hebrew word for Saul here, that he saw his father, it's not that he had a casual glance and turned away. The Hebrew word implies he gazed at him, apparently with satisfaction. Took a lot of satisfaction from the fact that his father was drunk and was laying there naked. When Noah sobered up, he realized what Ham had done. And by the way, hopefully you noticed this when we read the text, Ham is the youngest of the sons. For some reason, we always put the lists in the Bible. Always has him second, but he is the youngest son. That's what Noah says about him. So what was Ham's sin? Some look at what Moses wrote in Leviticus 20, verse 11, and also Leviticus 18, 7 and 8 might tie in. And they surmise from this that while Noah was drunk, Ham slept with his mother. And presumably his mother was drunk as well. And that this uncovering his father's nakedness refers to incest. A lot of problems with that theory. In fact, there's no basis for it anywhere. But proponents of it say that Canaan was the product of this incestual activity. But the language points to Noah knowing immediately after he sobered up what's happened and immediately curses Ham and his son, curses Cain in particular. I didn't have to wait for 9 months to see Canaan being born, so it doesn't make any sense. I suspect that this theory is a way of explaining the curse being on Canaan and not Ham, but it doesn't hold up in the text. Others say that the curse was on Canaan because he was the one who saw Noah and came and told Ham, and he came and they both were rejoiced over what they were seeing, and Ham then maliciously told his brothers. And that's based on that in Hebrew, the term son can sometimes mean grandson and father sometimes grandfather. And of course, some look at Ham's descendants going to Africa and extrapolate that this curse on Ham was to make him with dark skin. I think his skin was dark already before that. But they take it to mean that having dark skin is a curse of God. Actually, having dark skin is just having more melatonin in your skin, which is needed if you're going to live in those more warm, hot areas. So again, it doesn't make much sense. By the way, the Ku Klux Klan extensively used that absurd theory. Since Canaan was cursed and not Ham, they had a lot of wishful thinking. They had an agenda that they wanted to put forward. But some look at this and see that Ham rejoiced over Noah's nakedness, that he derived some sort of pleasure or malicious satisfaction in seeing his father in such a state. So he invited his brothers to come have a look too. Peter Williams and Edwin Jones take that view, and that this is largely showing disrespect to his father. I think there's a lot of that in there. Others, very, very few, but others think that maybe Ham molested his father in some way. But that doesn't really hold up in the text either. Bill Grasham wrote this and said, whatever Ham said to his brothers, it was probably done in a mocking way that showed contempt for his aged father and held him up to ridicule. Ham obviously did not have any empathy for his father or honor him at this weak moment in his life. Moreover, by telling his brothers about it and possibly inviting them also to look on their father's shame, he compounded his sin. It seems the curse of Canaan and not Ham is the reason for so many different theories on this passage, trying to explain it in some way. But if you think about it, Ham was cursed through his son's curse. Of course, there's no valid explanation as to why Noah has nothing done to him whatsoever. But unless his curse of his grandson reminds everybody of what he did, and that may have been Noah's punishment as well. But this sin has largely to do with him seeing his father naked. So why such a severe condemnation for seeing his father without any clothes on? Well, maybe because he didn't cover him up. Interesting. Maybe he just had the wrong view about all that, the wrong attitude towards his father. In Habakkuk chapter 2, we find this verse, which might have a bearing on it. Woe to him who makes his neighbors drink, and you pour out your wrath and make them drunk in order to gaze at their nakedness. Maybe that's got something to do with it. But the fact is that the fact that he looked may have indicated a serious disrespect for his father. Henry Morris wrote, a much more probable interpretation of Ham's actions here is that they expressed a long-hidden resentment of his father's authority and moral rectitude. There is apparently a carnal and rebellious bent to Ham's nature, thus far restrained by the spiritual strength and patriarchal authority of his father. Now, however, beholding the evidence of his father's weakness before his very eyes, he rejoiced, no doubt feeling a sense of release from all the inhibitions which had until now suppressed his own desires and ambitions. Thinking his brothers would share his satisfaction, he hastened to find them and told them the savory news. Literally, the text means he told with delight. Edwin Jones points out that nakedness is regarded as unacceptable in a relationship with God. William Smith suspects that there could have been a sexual element in it as well. He wrote this: the immoral quality in Ham's nature, demonstrated by his actions, seems to have been most conspicuously perpetuated in his son Canaan's descendants. By the time the children of Israel occupied the land of Canaan, both the lives and the religion of the Canaanites were thoroughly obsessed with sex. And we do see that in their descendants, in the Canaanites. And if you want to know anything about that, just study their religion somewhere. But Ham's descendants, through Cain, were to become, Noah said, slaves of Ham's brothers. And by the way, that used to be the proof text of where the African peoples came from and justified their being in slavery. Absolutely has nothing to do with that. Why mention Canaan rather than Ham? Well, the effect was going to be more pronounced on him than Ham. And it was Canaan's descendants that were driven out of Canaan by the Israelites. And some of them did indeed become the slaves of the Israelites. Read through Joshua and Judges and 1st, 2nd Samuel and the Kings, and you'll find some of this in there. Edwin Jones says the most satisfying answer lies in considering that after the flood, the narration of Genesis concerns itself with the developments of the nations that would have the most dealings with God's coming chosen people. With that in mind, Canaan became the name that later would be most connected with sexual perversion. What had started with Ham's look would develop through Canaan and later the Canaanites to become some of the most pronounced expressions of sexual misconduct in history. By the way, notice it doesn't say that all of Ham's descendants were cursed, but the line going through Canaan, which would get rid of the idea that all the descendants of Ham, largely those in Africa, were to be slaves of the rest. So it totally gets rid of that. Shem, though, would be blessed. Canaan was to be his slave. Japheth was to be enlarged to dwell in the tents of Shem with Canaan as their slave. Now, what that may be referring to, Shem was going to be the father of the Israelites eventually on down the line. Thus, he's blessed. That's the line that the Messiah is going to come through. Japheth was the father of most of the Gentiles. So this may be saying that someday the descendants of the Israelites, the Jews, and the Gentiles would dwell together as God's people. Let him dwell in the tents of Shem. As Shem's descendants drove out and conquered Ham's descendants, the Canaanites, really Canaan's descendants, after them would Japheth also come and conquer the Canaanites. Historically, you can see that in the world conquest of the Greeks and the Romans in particular. Bill Grasham points out it's difficult to find a period in history when this prophecy actually came to pass until the New Testament era. The ultimate fulfillment of Noah's request to God, then, appears to begin in the missionary journeys of Paul from Antioch in Syria to Tarsus to the Galatian cities, to Ephesus, across the Aegean Sea, to Macedonia, to Greece, and so forth. In these areas, the descendants of Japheth, Gentile Christians, were brought together peaceably with the descendants of Shem, Jewish Christians, in one habitation, the spiritual body of Christ, the church. So hopefully that gives you at least some idea of some explanations for this strange text that we have here. I do like Bill Grasham's explanation there of the end of it. An interesting note, at least to me it's interesting, the word for God in verse 26, in speaking of Shem, is Yahweh. And in verse 27, in speaking of Japheth, it is in Hebrew Elohim, just translated God by Hugo McCord. So there could be an indication here that it would be Shem's descendants in the Israelites that would know God under his covenant name. So there may be a lot going on here that at a casual reading we don't really pull out. There's some parallels between Adam and Noah that I think are worth noting. Both were commanded to fill the earth and have control over it. Both are the ancestors of all people. Both sinned by partaking of a fruit. Each became naked and as a result, they needed a covering. And that covering was provided by somebody else. Both sins resulted in a prophecy and a curse, which has affected all of mankind. But along with the curse was a blessing as well. Quite like that because there's some good parallels there. The very end of the text tells us that Noah lived after the flood an additional 350 years, and he died. As there's no other mention with his name of other sons and daughters like we saw back in chapter 5, that would indicate that he had no further children, and all people descended from his 3 sons. We'll see that in the next 2 chapters. The total years of Noah were 950, so he would have died about 58 years before Abraham was born. We'll look at that later. Whatever conditions that seem to have changed on the earth following the flood, which shortened the human lifespan, did not seem to have affected Noah. He lived longer than all of his ancestors, except for Jared. He died at 962, and of course Methuselah, who died at 969. If you think about that, how close their ages were in their lifespans, it would not have been a problem for the history recorded in Genesis to have been handed down the centuries using very few people. Adam died 126 years before Noah was born. Seth died only 14 years before Noah. Noah would have been contemporary with Terah, Abraham's father. And by the way, just to point this out, we've used these scriptures before, but Noah is not just referred to in the book of Genesis. Some people get the idea we need to just get rid of the first 11 chapters of Genesis and we'll be happy because it obliterates all of that creation and flood stuff. Actually, it doesn't. It's all through the text of the Old Testament and the New Testament. Just getting rid of 11 chapters isn't going to get rid of this history. As far as Noah is concerned, Isaiah talked about him as an historical figure in Isaiah 54. Ezekiel mentioned him in the context of two other righteous men. These were the three most righteous, he says. And of course, he's listed in the genealogy of Jesus. And Jesus himself referred to his coming in judgment as being like the days of Noah. And the writer to the Hebrews and also Peter in his letters referred to the faithfulness of Noah. If you're going to start cutting out parts of the Bible, you're going to have to cut out a lot of it to get rid of the parts we don't like. I would suggest we leave it in because that's what the Holy Spirit wanted. It's what God wanted. This is part of the history of what God did. Now, next week we'll pick up with this, not Noah now, but we'll have a look at Genesis 10, and in particular, the table of nations that we find there, and have a look at what that says, and that'll lead us into chapter 11 for the last week as well. Anyway, that's chapter 9. I know I spent quite a bit of time on Canaan and Ham, but I felt needed to address some of that because that is a very confusing bit of scripture. Now, hopefully, some of that explanation made some sense.